Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sam, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our next virtual event with Professor Celia Starr, who is here to present her debut book, Frida in America, The Creative Awakening of a Great Artist. We're so excited to have her, and you can purchase her book and support her and Book Soup by clicking on the green button below right here. And yeah, so we're really grateful that we can have these events virtually right now because we can't in person and still continue to bring our authors and our communities together. So thank you so much for participating and joining and supporting us, and we're excited to continue. So we'll be hosting more events in the near future, and you can learn about them on our website and on our social media. You can follow us at Book Soup on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And our next event after this one is coming this Saturday, May 16th, with Gibby Haynes and Thomas Patrick Lennon discussing their young adult novels. So you can also sign up for our newsletter to get those updates directly. And this evening's event will end with a Q&A. So to submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button, which is also at the bottom. And then I'm going to moderate those at the end. So we will make sure to get them all. And if you see a question on the list that you'd like for our speaker to answer, you can click the like button and bump it up, but we'll go through them all anyway. And we'll answer as many as time will allow. So you can please consider supporting our bookstore in Celia by purchasing a copy of tonight's book. And you can also find them on Libro FM, which I'll post a link in the comments on the side. And with that said, let me introduce our guest speaker for this evening. Celia Stahr teaches art history at the University of San Francisco, where she specializes in modern and contemporary art history with an emphasis on feminist and multicultural art. Formerly an affiliated scholar at Stanford's Clayman Institute for Gender Research, Stahr focused on the marginalized abstract expressionist painter Elaine de Kooning. She's published essays and articles on Elaine de Kooning, Frida Kahlo, Young Soon Min, and Amalia Mesa Baines. Did I say that right? While researching Frida in America, Stahr began a blog that discusses various topics related to the themes of the book, as well as contemporary Frida events and artistic expressions inspired by Frida herself. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Celia, and let's get started. So thank you so much, Celia, for being with us.
Thank you, Sam. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm really thankful to Book Soup for being able to act quickly and to respond to our new, unusual circumstances by putting together this virtual event. So thank you. And I also want to thank all of you for joining us tonight and coming to hear me talk about my book and to really support Frida. Frida was really a lifelong supporter of the working class. And I really would like to dedicate this talk tonight to all the workers who are out there doing their best to help us, whether it's the healthcare workers, people who are helping to serve us food, give us food, bring food to our grocery stores, the garbage collectors, everybody who's really on the front lines. I dedicate this talk to you tonight. Now, clearly, we are living through very challenging times, and I'm going to switch to my slides now. And as I said, we're living through challenging times. There are times that are literally challenging us to shift our way of thinking about ourselves in relationship to others, both our loved ones, but also the larger communities. And artists, have always been using the visual medium to express new ways of thinking about ourselves and our views of the world. And some of the creative responses to this worldwide pandemic have been witty and thought-provoking refashionings of famous works of art, such as Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Grant Wood's American Gothic, and of course my favorite, Frida Kahlo's The Two Fridas, where now we see that the two Fridas are no longer joined by clasped hands or a shared artery. And so we're left with this distance between the two Fridas, which really emphasizes both the void that many of us might feel within ourselves at this time, and or the distance between ourselves and our loved ones. Now, thankfully, fashion designer Ashley Nell Tipton has created a Frida mask that can help people connect with others while standing 6 feet apart. And so now people can wear the Frida masks as a means of protection and also self-expression, says Tipton. Of course, it's also an expression of cultural pride, as Frida, a Mexican woman and artist, represents strength, vulnerability, and pride. These are qualities that were really instilled within Frida from a young age. She was 3 years old when the Mexican Revolution began in 1910, and as an adult, she referred to herself as a child of the Mexican Revolution.
Celia, sorry to interrupt. I think you have to share the screen so that we can see the presentation.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
So back on the screen where you can toggle your video.
Yeah, what happened?
Sorry to interrupt.
Where? Okay, sorry. Where is it now? Oh,
right.
Down. Oh,
yeah,
here. Here we go.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, it's working.
I can't see it.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not.
Does everyone else see the screen share?
It says it's in the process of working, but it's not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's connecting. That's great so far. I just know we want to see the picture.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not, you can't tell what I'm talking about if you don't see the pictures, right? Okay, well. I don't know why it's not allowing it.
Maybe I can share it from my screen.
Okay. You could try.
Yeah, if you just email me the PowerPoint, I'll go.
Okay. Let's see.
Well, this did work before.
Yeah, it worked before. I don't know. Here. I'm going to try something here.
You have that share screen button, right, with the little arrow on it?
Yeah, I do. But it's, for some reason, it won't let me share. I'm going to see if I can go through Chrome.
Okay, yep, that probably will work better.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone. Thank you for your patience. In these weird technical times where we're all figuring it out.
So,
Gabrielle, maybe you have to stop sharing and then try and share again. Did you already have it on and then up? This is like that weird part in the movie where you're left like on stage, like when Wayne leaves Garth in the studio. I'll be right back. Welcome back.
Are we back?
Yes.
Okay, let me try this again.
Okay.
Share screen. Hmm. No, I don't know what's happening here.
Does it have that arrow that it has under?
So when it says share screen, it says your entire screen, application window, Chrome tab.
Yes. So you probably want to go to application window, which is where PowerPoint should be.
Okay. Okay, let's see. All right, let's see. Okay.
I see a black screen. So.
Okay, here, wait, hold on a minute. Let me see. Let me do one more thing. See if you see the screen.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
I do not.
Oh.
PowerPoint, did you make it full screen?
Yes.
And did you start? And you started the presentation?
Yeah. Well, it's. Yeah. You can't see anything, huh?
No.
Oh. Okay, let's see. This worked fine the other day when we did it.
I know.
Let's see. Can you see me right now?
Yes.
Okay, so you see half of me and half of the black screen.
Yes.
Let's see.
Maybe just share, can you share just your whole screen and then minimize and go to PowerPoint? Because that's what you did last time and that worked.
Right, okay. Okay, so yeah, let's see here. Now I don't have share screen. Where's share screen?
I'm going to close your video now.
Okay.
Did it go back up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's try this.
Okay, I can see that. Beautiful. There it is.
Hey. Wow.
Yay.
All right, well.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
A beautiful beginning, so I'm excited for the rest.
Okay, well, I will. I won't repeat all of it, but since you didn't get to see the images. All right, so as I was saying, we're clearly living through challenging times, right? Like just now, having to do these virtual talks and having the equipment not work. But also in other ways, we're living through challenging times. But artists, as I said, have always used the visual medium to express new ways of thinking about ourselves and our view of the world. And so I've been inspired by some creative responses to famous works of art where others now are refashioning them for the period we live in. So Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Grant Wood's American Gothic, and again, my favorite, Frida Kahlo's The Two Fridas. And now you can see all of the space, right, that's in between the two Fridas. They're no longer connected by an artery or by their hands. And so it's really poignant to, emphasize the distance, right, between us right now. And we're experiencing this distance in many different ways. We can experience it, again, internally, but also what we feel in relationship to not being able to see all of our loved ones in the way we'd like to. But here we go. Here's the fashion designer, Ashley Nell-Tipton, who has created this Frida mask. And again, it's one way to help us connect. It's also an expression of cultural pride, as she said. She says it's a self-expression, cultural pride. And Frida, of course, is a perfect person to represent pride. She is a Mexican woman and artist, and she does represent for us strength, vulnerability, and pride. And these are qualities, as I was saying, that were really instilled within Frida from a young age. She was 3 years old when the Mexican Revolution began in 1910, and as an adult, she referred to herself as a child of the Mexican Revolution. Porfirio Diaz looks in the mirror and sees his brown mestizo skin. He picks up a powder puff dusted in white and begins to cover his indigenous Mixtec ancestry. For 31 years, this military general led Mexico masquerading as a light-skinned Spanish man because he wanted to make his country over into a Europe of the New World. By 1910, this ideal that had permeated the social fabric of Mexican society began to unravel with the outbreak of revolution. 20 years later, while in San Francisco, the artist Frida Kahlo looks in the mirror and sees her light brown skin. She's thankful she didn't end up with her father's German complexion, commenting, quote, "I remember the color of my father's skin, that I did not like it," end quote. She's happy to see her mother's darker skin and powerful, deep-set eyes, accented by her maternal grandmother's conjoined eyebrows. She parts her black hair down the middle and pulls it back into a low bun. She applies lipstick, places Aztec-inspired earrings in her earlobes, and clasps an Aztec jadeite necklace around her neck. Then, over her long peasant-style skirt and blouse, she wraps her shoulders with a rebozo, that ubiquitous shawl symbolizing Mexican women of all classes. But the way she crosses the shawl over her shoulders creates the look of a soldadera, a revolutionary female soldier who wore bullet-filled bandoliers crossed in front. Sometimes, when not in uniform, soldaderas wore their rebozos crossed in front to distinguish themselves as soldiers. They played a crucial role in the revolution, and their fame grew as the popular corrido La Adelita about a soldadera who fought for Francisco Madero's troops came to symbolize the revolutionary spirit. After the revolution, the name Adelita became synonymous with any woman who fought for her rights. Frida identified with Adelita and the soldaderas, and while at a Mexican restaurant in San Francisco, she belted out the song La Adelita, proclaiming to her mother, "I was a hit." Frida knew when she posed for Imogene Cunningham that by arranging her rebozo in a similar fashion to the soldaderas and wearing Aztec-inspired jewelry, that she evoked the persona of the politically engaged Mexican nationalist. For Frida, who was still coming into her own as a 23-year-old woman, that identity was bound up with the image of the strong, independent, and at times cross-dressing soldaderas. Frida would soon start creating self-portraits that foregrounded her strength as well. This is what struck me the first time I saw Self-Portrait with Monkey, a fierce warrior with black hair pulled back tightly, showing off a prominent forehead, akin to an Aztec warrior, and a bird-like unibrow above intense brown eyes. A black spider monkey perched on her shoulder places its paw around this warrior's neck in a protective yet menacing pose that has the potential to strangle her as it clutches a red ribbon that loops around her neck and the monkey's. Yet Frida, the warrior, doesn't look fearful. This woman radiates power. She's proud of her brown skin and her jet black eyebrows, as well as her facial hair just above and below her lips. Standing in front of a dense field of dark green leaves, her red hair ribbon and yellow shirt position her as a very different kind of woman in nature, a theme I'd seen previously in art, but which looked different. Frida doesn't stand nude in nature with an ethereal look on her face. She doesn't lie out in nature nude either. Nor does she have a mask-like face, as in Paula Modersohn-Becker's Self-Portrait with Amber Necklace. In some ways, she has the strong gaze and connection to nature of Leonardo's Mona Lisa. But Frida makes her connection to nature even stronger, with the integration of the leaves, the monkey, and the warrior. Just look into the eyes of the warrior and the monkey. They are one and the same. They command this painting. At the time I encountered this image, I was an undergraduate college student at San Francisco State, sitting in one of my first art history classes, and I had never heard of Frida Kahlo. I had just returned from a 3.5-month trip to East Africa, and before that, a trip to Mexico, and I was questioning what to do with my life. In that darkened art history lecture hall, when Professor Whitney Chadwick clicked the slide projector to advance to this painting of a fierce woman and her spider monkey, all the cliches you can imagine happened at once. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't stop staring. I just had to know who made this painting. I couldn't get this image of Frida out of my head, so I wrote my first art history paper on this then little-known Mexican painter. At the time, Hayden Herrera had recently published her groundbreaking biography and was promoting it by making the rounds on college campuses and bookstores. I was overjoyed when I saw she was coming to San Francisco. The more I learned about Frida, the more I wanted to know. I became immersed in my research for this art history paper and in the world of Frida. Just as traveling to East Africa and Mexico had opened me up to new ways of seeing the world, Frida Kahlo's Self-Portrait with Monkey helped to change my path in life. I decided to study art history in graduate school. As most of you are probably aware, throughout the 1980s and into the 90s and the 2000s, Frida's popularity grew as more and more people discovered the incredible art and life of this Mexican woman who was a trailblazer in so many ways. She was a radical in the 1930s and 1940s because she defied gender and racial stereotypes, both in her life and in her paintings. More and more books and articles were written, exhibitions were mounted, movies were made, and artists began to incorporate aspects of Frida's image and her art into their own. She's been important around the world, but certainly in this country, we see images of her in San Francisco. She plays a very important role within San Francisco, both seeing images of her on the street, but also just a great love of Frida and having even a street named after her. Also in New York, we see evidence, of course, of Frida's influence, and also in Los Angeles. And so by the end of the 1990s, Frida had become famous, and I had begun to focus on other artists. I never stopped loving Frida's paintings. I just tucked her away while I worked on my PhD. But Frida wouldn't let go of me. In 2007, now teaching at the University of San Francisco, I had the opportunity to present a paper for a conference there that featured women artists working between the two world wars. As I pondered which artist I wanted to focus on, I realized that all the artists I'd ever read about from the interwar period were white Europeans. My interest had always been cross-cultural, so I thought Frida would be fascinating because she was Mexican, yet she was living in the United States between 1930 and 1933, a period that was instrumental in her development as an artist and the creation of her persona as a provocateur. Now, certainly scholars had discussed her important breakthrough paintings while in Detroit, such as Henry Ford Hospital and My Birth. But a fuller understanding of her creative process, which led to these breakthroughs, and her complex reactions to what she experienced in San Francisco, Detroit, and New York were missing. We knew a lot about her mature style, but not as much about her development as an artist. How did she get from Two Women, created in 1929, to the Two Fridas 10 years later? Or how did she get from Two Women to Portrait of Ava Frederick? Or from Portrait of Mrs. Jean White to Portrait of Luther Burbank, which was only created 3 months later? Likewise, when we look at her self-portrait Time Flies, created shortly after she married artist Diego Rivera, we see quite a shift in the way she presents herself when we look at Henry Ford Hospital from 1932, made in Detroit. It's a very, very different way for her to present herself. And so how did living in the United States, a place Frida experienced in a tumultuous period of the Depression era, impact her? Most would say that she disliked Gringolandia. And this is true, but it's also a bit simplistic. Yes, she disliked, even hated it in many ways, but she also found San Francisco to be a beautiful city. She marveled at Chinatown. She loved the Metropolitan Museum in New York, got a kick out of American movies and actresses such as Mae West, or actors such as Charlie Chaplin. In Detroit, the industrial capital, she found its industries, especially the Ford Motor Company, interesting. I wanted to understand more fully what it was that Frida disliked and what it was that she liked. What had the most impact on her, either in a positive or a negative manner? Now, when discussing Frida's time in the United States, understandably, scholars tend to focus on these two breakthrough paintings because they foreground Frida's physical and emotional pain, a subject that's emphasized in the literature on the artist. But she also created two of her most politically charged paintings: Self-Portrait on the Borderline Between Mexico and the United States, created in Detroit, and My Dress Hangs There, created in New York. Self-portrait on the borderline between Mexico and the United States actually became the focal point of my talk for that conference on artists working between the two world wars. It's really one of Frida's most complex paintings to date, with a smoke-belching Ford factory, high-rises, and machines occupying the right side, and the ruins of a pyramid, a crumbling wall, a skull, two ceramic figurines, flowers, and cacti occupying the left. In the middle, on a border marker, stands Frida with perfect posture. She wears a colonial-style floor-length dress with fitted bodice. Now, while it's easy to get lost in all the images in this painting, details matter. This proper-looking young woman becomes a provocateur when you notice her tight-fitting bodice and visible nipples. Her obvious bralessness would have raised eyebrows among the Detroit area's upper crust. But Frida doesn't look ashamed. She stands tall as an independent Mexican woman, symbolized by the lit cigarette in one hand and the paper Mexican flag in the other. She also stands tall as a mestizo, a woman of mixed ethnicities wearing a colonial-style dress and a beaded necklace bearing the colors of the Mexican flag. It's a hybrid outfit, and it's appropriate, as scholar Gloria Anzaldúa observes, quote, "The Mexico-United States border is a site where many different cultures touch each other, and the permeable, flexible, and ambiguous shifting grounds lend themselves to hybrid images," quote, end quote. Frida plays up her hybridity through her outfit and through her connection to both sides of the border. In 2007, I wanted to know more about this 1932 painting, both in terms of symbolism and the context in which Frida created it. What was Frida's experience of the US-Mexico border? Is the pyramid on the left a reference to the Mexica, better known as the Aztecs? It shows two stairways indicating it's Aztec, but would Frida have been familiar with Aztec pyramids in this period when Mexico was just beginning to uncover so many of its ruins that had been destroyed by the conquistadors? Why does Frida place the American flag in the smoke of Ford industry? What did she think of Henry Ford and his River Rouge factory? I also wanted to know what was happening with Ford workers around the time she was making this painting. I had so many questions. One thing I did find out, of course, is that on New Year's Day in 1933, Ford cut employees' wages for the second time in 3 years, prompting 9,000 workers to go on strike. A little more than a month later, a reproduction of Frida's painting was shown in the February Detroit News article, "Wife of Master Mural Painter Gleefully Dabbles in Works of Art." While journalist Florence Davies belittles Frida's talent as an artist with her choice of words, "gleefully dabbles," in the title, she conceded in the article that Frida's painting is by no means a joke, end quote. And this becomes apparent when comparing it to other US artists like Charles Sheeler's American Landscape, which glorifies Ford's River Rouge factory. So in 2007, I still had many unanswered questions about this painting, Self-Portrait on the Borderline between Mexico and the United States, as well as Frida's time in Detroit. I wanted to know more about a trip that she took to Mexico by train with her American friend and fellow artist, Lucienne Bloch. Frida had begun Self-Portrait on the Borderline between Mexico and the United States before leaving on this trip to Mexico. She left for Mexico because she found out that her mother was ill. When she returned to Detroit a month and a half later, she completed the painting. And so significantly, at this point, when she completes this painting, she crossed over the border twice, just crossed over the border twice. So what types of experiences did she have? Thankfully, I had Lucienne Bloch's insightful journal to provide an answer to this question and many more. In 2008, I continued working on my analysis of this painting for another symposium. This time, this symposium accompanied the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art's Frida exhibition. The theme of the symposium, An idea that Whitney Chadwick and I proposed to the museum was to focus on the 3 US cities where Frida had lived and created: San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. Whitney Chadwick discussed Frida in San Francisco, I discussed Frida in Detroit, and Hayden Herrera discussed Frida in New York. I felt as if I had come full circle from my early days as a student and discovering Frida due to both Whitney Chadwick and Hayden Herrera. It was really one of the high points of my career. I was also thrilled to meet and speak with art historian Victor Zamudio Taylor, who had contributed an essay to the Frida exhibition catalog, to artist Amalia Mesa Baines, and to curator-scholar Terry Romero. They had all been symposium respondents, and the conversations with all 3, both on stage and in private, made me realize that many of the questions I had about Frida's artistic sources and her creative development, both before coming to the United States and while she was in the United States, didn't have clear answers. I needed to conduct a lot more research. In the weeks after the symposium at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, a feeling grew inside of me that I needed to write the book I wanted to read. I envisioned a book for a general audience, detailing Frida's personal and creative journey while living in the United States from 1930 to 1933. I wanted to write a story, not a scholarly essay or a scholarly book, but a story that would be well-researched and factual, yet written in a style that would allow readers to feel as if they were on this journey with Frida. As the documentary filmmaker Ken Burns put it, history is mostly story. For it is the great storytelling tradition found in most cultures and time periods that allows us to understand complex information in a manner that sticks because we feel something. Perhaps Maya Angelou says it best. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. My hope is that this cross-cultural journey will inspire people to think about Frida in new and profound ways, to understand her more fully as a complex, brilliant woman who in her early 20s struggled to find her own voice as an artist and person, but who ultimately broke through to a signature style that she would build upon for the rest of her career. I believe Frida had everything inside her that she needed to produce a major breakthrough in her art before coming to the United States. However, experiencing both her own personal turmoil and the United States' political and social turmoil, I think it created this combustible energy that produced artworks such as Portrait of Luther Burbank, Henry Ford Hospital, My Birth, Self-Portrait on the Borderline, and My Dress Hangs There. As one of Frida's favorite authors, D.H. Lawrence said, quote, "All art partakes of the spirit of place in which it is produced," end quote. This place happened to be the United States. And so the word America in the title of my book references Frida's time in the United States of America. But because this is a story about a Mexican artist, it's an America seen through Frida's eyes. She brings a very different and complicated perspective to what we in the United States often refer to as the American experience. For her, America is both the United States and Latin America. It is the problematic North American border relationship between Mexico and the United States. And it is the promise of Pan-Americanism that Venezuelan politician Simón Bolívar first promoted in 1826, and which was taken up by artists, intellectuals, and social activists in the 1930s, including Frida's husband, muralist Diego Rivera. Frida is an icon today, but in her role as a beloved icon, as scholar Margaret Lindauer has observed, quote, Kahlo became synonymous with a look rather than with her creative production, end quote. That is, Frida's look is often more well known than the contents and interpretations of her paintings. To this end, in tracing her creative process, I wanted to look closely at the paintings. I thought it would be incredible if I could somehow discuss the paintings in a way that allowed readers to step into them as if they were stepping into rooms. So instead of looking at a work of art from a distance as one might in a gallery or museum, I thought if I could create a greater intimacy between Frida's paintings and the readers, then people might gain a deeper understanding of her creative process and the multiple layers of her often profound works of art, layers that derive from hybrid images often, Catholic, Aztec, colonial paintings, modern paintings, Mexican cultural traditions, and subjects from the United States, etc. Likewise, in the epilogue, I wanted to give a sense of how the new breakthrough paintings created in the United States affected her later work. Here we see how the use of blood and red strings were first used in her paintings in the United States. But these two symbols, as well as the heart, become more prevalent in her work after she returned to Mexico in 1933. To this end, I wrote the prologue to emphasize the significance of blood, the heart, and Aztec traditions for Frida. And so I'd like to end tonight by reading the prologue. The Aztec god Huitzilopochtli threw a rebel's heart into Lake Texcoco and proclaimed, "When you see an eagle perched on a cactus holding a snake in its mouth, this is where you shall build your city." Aztec Myth. Excuse me, that is my dog making a sound. Stop it. Frida was lying in a blood-soaked bed. Small creases in the white cotton sheets had absorbed the red liquid like the fruit of a prickly pear cactus sliced open. Glistening magenta, fruit of the earth, the blood miracle that consecrated the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, now surrounded Frida's naked body with the pain of death. The eagle and snake were missing in that dark early morning hour. But the sun still came up, casting light on Frida's dark, damp hair covered with salty tears. She wailed in agony and despair. Diego, frantic, didn't know what to do. The blood, the screaming, it was all too much for him. He rushed into the living room, muttering something about the doctor. A call was made, but Frida would have to suffer for another hour before an ambulance arrived. At the Henry Ford Hospital, Frida, recumbent on a gurney, was whisked through a long, narrow cement hallway in the basement, her eyes fixed on what she perceived to be multicolored pipes on the ceiling. "Look, Diego, que precioso, how beautiful," she exclaimed. This was the last bit of beauty Frida would encounter for a while. "We descend from death," Carlos Fuentes sings out. Death smiles, dances, and provides the sweet caresses of a lover. The skeletons of Jose Guadalupe Posada fill the imagination, especially during Day of the Dead celebrations, embracing Mexicans with their origins, holding on to Aztec times. "The past is always present," Fuentes whispers. "The heart, center of the human body, is the axis mundi. Keep the universe in motion," the Aztecs proclaimed. "Feed the gods." Blood was the cuisine the gods favored. Blood creates a line from the earthly to the divine, from death to life, from darkness to light. The duality of life for the Aztecs, as for Frida, was a bringing together of opposites. "Everything is all in one," Frida wrote. Seating these opposites side by side to share the blood of death and life, she painstakingly stitched them together with paint, one small stroke at a time. Blood and the concept of duality became central for Frida's art and life while living in the United States. She was a child of the Mexican Revolution, as she liked to say, a passionate defender of the underdog. But it took living in the United States, a place she'd longed to visit since her teenage years, to shake her foundations of home and homeland, forcing her to see a different reality. She struggled and stumbled in this foreign country, cursing it at times, embracing it at others, but always she visualized it with a keen eye for the humor that bubbled under the surface of pain. Frida loved life. It came through in her infectious, throaty laugh and in her direct manner of speaking, even in English. Sometimes she'd exaggerate her Mexican accent when necessary to spice up the conversation or punctuate a point. It came through in her way of dressing, whether she was wearing a man's suit or a colorful peasant-style pleated skirt. Details mattered. The right Aztec-inspired earrings, the perfect length cane, the precise size of jadeite beads, the best shade of lipstick. Everything was done with love. Love is the only reason for living, she proclaimed. Fuentes said Frida was a natural pantheist, a woman and an artist involved in the glory of universal celebration, an explorer of the interrelatedness of all things, a priestess declaring everything created as sacred. When she came to the United States at 23 with her husband, muralist Diego Rivera, she was still at the beginning of this exploration, with eyes wide open, seeing how all things were interrelated and integrating this universal celebration into her art. The young Frida was a novice painter. Her husband, on the other hand, was 44 and at the height of his creative powers. When Time magazine ran a short article on Diego a year into his stay in the United States, it referred to Frida as, quote, his pretty little Mexican wife, the former Frida Kahlo, end quote. Frida would always be physically petite, but her identity as Frida Kahlo, the great painter, grew in stature as she grew creatively and personally in the United States. Her first stop was San Francisco, a place she dreamt about for years. The day before Diego received the letter from the American architect Timothy Pfluger inviting him to paint a mural on the wall of his recently completed Pacific Stock Exchange building in San Francisco, Frida had her recurring dream. She saw herself waving goodbye to her family as she left her beloved Mexican homeland for San Francisco, the city of the world, as she called it. It amazed Diego that Frida's dream had been so prescient. Frida knew she had to start packing because she believed you had to, quote, protect what destiny has given you, end quote. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. That was wonderful. We have now would be time to get some questions in. We do have one question.
Okay.
That is, what are your thoughts on Frida's painting, Lo que me dio el agua, what the water gave me? Normally, we clearly see her face and her wounded body. In this painting, only shows part of her leg and feet, one of them bleeding. So what are your thoughts on that painting?
Oh, wow. I think it's an amazing painting. I really love the way she set it up so that we are looking from her perspective into the water. And of course, she incorporates all of these images in the water that represent her life in some manner. It's interesting because there have been other artists who have used the bathtub. Excuse me, but typically you'll see a figure, and often a female figure, in the bathtub, right? But in this case, as I said, we're put in the position of Frida, looking at her life. So on one level, we can really experience what it felt like for her on some level to be in that bathtub and looking at all of these images and thinking about what this meant for her. Bathtubs were important for her. She enjoyed the feeling of being in water. When she lived in New York and it was extremely hot, this is in 1933 when she went to New York the second time, and she was there during the summer, it got so hot and humid that she would often lie in the bathtub for hours, just staying cool. She also had a bathtub in one of the houses that she and Diego built together. And so when she returned from the United States to this, she had two houses, right? So her house that she grew up in, and then the house that was built for her and Diego, and they were separate units, but they had a bridge that connected them. And in that house, she had a bathtub, and supposedly that was the bathtub that she used for her inspiration when she created that painting. I think it reveals her the way, again, that she was such a master at using symbolism, the psychological nature of her work. And so, yes, as you said, you're absolutely right. It's a great question that we normally see her, right, in her self-portraits. And in this way, as I kind of said already, we're actually given access to her, but in a very different manner. And I think it's really one of her most powerful paintings.
Thank you. Do you, this question's from me. Do you, after working so closely with her as a figure, do you feel like she's present around you? Do you ever feel like that kind of closeness with her through the ethers after being so connected to her in her life?
Yes. Yes, most definitely. It's sort of hard to describe in a way in using words, but yes, I mean, even when I was working on the book, as I sort of hinted at in my talk, I was really trying to get to, how does Frida feel? This is something that Ira Glass, who does This American Life on NPR, said one time. He said whenever he's doing a story, he asks of the subject he's working on, what does so-and-so feel? And so that became one of my mantras as I kept working on the book and wanting to always understand and figure out, if I could, what was Frida feeling in this particular moment or when she was creating this painting. And so sometimes I would just get really frustrated and I would just say, Frida, what were you feeling? Just tell me what you were feeling. And, it's not like something magical necessarily happened, but I did have many dreams during the process. And I was really fortunate in that, as I said in my talk, I had access to Lucien Bloch's journal. And so I really got, she was with Frida in Detroit and New York. And so I got a very up close and personal idea of what their lives were like. And then I also was able to access letters at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And so those letters that Frida wrote home during her stay in the US also really helped me to gain a much greater understanding of what she was experiencing and what she was feeling. And so just, spending so much time rereading letters, rereading the journals, looking at her art like for so many hours, looking at the details. Yeah, I mean, she just has kind of become a part of my consciousness, I guess you would say.
Yeah, of course. That's pretty amazing. We do have another question. The Suicide of Dorothy Hale painting. This is from Hannah. I read that Hale had recently separated from her husband as Kahlo was separating from Diego. Do you have thoughts on this tremendous painting?
Yeah, this is another painting that I think is so powerful. I actually had written a lot about it for my epilogue, and then it got cut. A lot of things got cut from the book. And first off, so this woman, Dorothy Hale, commits suicide, and one of the reasons that's sort of given for her wanting to take her own life in this time period of the late 30s is because she didn't have, her husband had, if I remember all the details now, I think her husband had died suddenly at some point, and then she was struggling as a independent, as a single woman, a widowed woman. She didn't really have the same amount of money anymore, and she had this feeling that her life was over, even though she was, like, I think in her early 30s and was beautiful. But there was a real sense at this time that if you were a woman and you were, 30 or over, if you weren't married, you were, your life was over. Like, that you just were going to have a horrible life, and you were an old maid. And so she seemed to feel that pressure. I mean, I'm sure there were many other things too that contributed, but Frida Kahlo then, who had known her and met her while she was in the United States in New York, she creates this painting to pay homage to her. And what she does, if you're not familiar with the painting, is that she shows this woman, the way she committed suicide. She jumped out of her window in New York City and fell to the ground and died. And so Frida shows her in three different moments, as if you're watching a film in slow motion. So you see her kind of coming out of the window and then falling, and then on the ground. And on the ground, you actually see like blood coming out of her mouth, but it's done in this way that it's actually kind of beautiful, the way that she does it. And so I think it's really a very powerful, poignant image. But for many in the United States, it was just, it was just too over the top. They couldn't understand it. They didn't like it. But I think that Frida, certainly wasn't trying to be, I don't think she was trying to be gruesome. I think it was just, her sense of death really came out of course, this Mexican tradition where where she was used to celebrating death on a certain level. And also she had come very close to death in her near fatal bus accident back in 1925. So yeah, I think it's an incredibly innovative and powerful painting. Now, whether it had anything to do with her separation from Diego, I mean, that could be certainly connected on some level, although her separation is coming, I think, a little bit later. But I would say she had great sympathy for Dorothy Hale and her plight in life.
Thank you. We have one more question, and I'm going to just ask for a last call from everybody. But we have this one from Yvette. Did you spend any time at her home in Koyokan to help build your understanding of Frida?
Yes, I did. And that was an incredibly powerful experience. I stayed actually in an Airbnb just down the street from her house because I really wanted to feel that area and her house as much as I could. Even though my book focuses on the United States, I say in the introduction that place is important to the book, but it was also important to Frida. Her home was so important to her. And she, as her many friends said, everything she did, she put love into it. And you can really feel that. I mean, even though the house, of course, has been changed since she lived there, many of the objects, though, are the same ones that she owned. It's just that they were, slightly changed and modified in the placement of them after she died. But you really feel her presence there. And I spent 2 days there. I should say 2 full days there. I could have probably spent even more time there, but I needed to do some other research and see other art as well. But it's really one of my favorite museums I've ever been to, and I highly recommend it to anybody who has not been there. It's incredible outside and inside. You can hang out in the gardens, and they're beautiful. Inside, you see some of her art. You see many of the works that she owned by other artists. You see her studio and this vast collection of books. She was quite a bibliophile. She said that she had read almost every book about her own country, but also she read widely, and she read in other languages. And so there's really a lot to take in there. And as I said, I really felt her presence there for sure, her energy.
That's beautiful. Did you go to the exhibit that was in New York a couple years ago?
The one that was at the Brooklyn Museum?
No, it was up in the Bronx.
Oh, yes, I did go to that one.
And like,
Yes,
I know the name of the museum. I lived there at the time, so I went to that one, and it was
yeah.
beautiful, stunning.
Yes, yes, that was at the Botanical Gardens.
Yes, thank you. I was
Yeah,
blank. It was.
yeah, and that, no, yeah, I really enjoyed that exhibition, and it was a great way for people who haven't been to Koyokan or who can't get there to at least have a sense, yeah, of what her home was like. Well, at least the outside, the gardens. Yeah, that was a very I thought powerful and beautiful exhibit.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I went there with my friend who loves her, and it was
Hmm.
really
Yeah,
that is all for our questions. And thank you so much, Celia, for being with us. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Mary says thank you for a wonderful presentation. And Hannah says thank you for creating the space and for this superb presentation. So thank you, everyone, for being with us. Thank you, Yvette, for your question. And thank you, Celia, for being with us. This was amazing. And don't forget to support Celia's book. You can purchase at the green button below. I try to look, it's not on Libro FM yet, but one day. And thank you so much, everyone, for supporting Book Soup and supporting our authors. And
thank
everyone,
you.
take
Yes,
care.
thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Sam.
Bye.
Good, good night.